Welcome to the panel, gentlemen. And I think it's you guys may have gone through this session quite a few times because it's an unprecedented thing that we're going through in history right now, where COVID-19 created this strange situation where we had a notice of 4 hours before we hit a lockdown, and then it got extended about 4 times after that, with a slow opening up of the same to allow for trade and commerce and people to go about their lives as what we thought as normal. There are a few questions that I've got, which I'd like to sort of create a discussion amongst the 4 of you. And the first one being, okay, let me start with something which is simple, right? Which is work from home. What was the impact that sort of your organization had to face from conducting your business? So this is not about work from home right now. I'll come to that point later, which is around how did the work from home scenario impact your business from a consumer perspective, but how did it actually impact your operations? How did things change? Devendra?
Yeah, hi, Abhijit. So you see, a majority of our business is essentials. So when the lockdown started, we've not shut our stores a single day from the day the lockdown started. And even though, let's say, the senior managers by and large have worked from home, 95% of the organization work in the stores or in the delivery business. So frankly, we've been working, most of the organization. There's not a single day our stores were shut. Of course, in a state or two, stores were shut. And we did have some challenges. For example, only groceries were allowed or essentials. So the fashion, apparel, and the general merchandise one had to cordon off, put up a tate, and not allow customers to go there. Then in the beginning, delivery was a challenge, getting people to the stores because the public transport wasn't available was a challenge. So we actually came up with a lot of innovative solutions. You can imagine for us, the business completely pivoted from majority consumers coming to store where our staff was working mostly. A lot of people wanted goods delivered to their homes. And if you remember in March, April, May, you couldn't add capacity or hire people, that was not the time. So we actually came up with the novel solution. We called up the head of Uber, and nobody was taking Uber at that time, so the drivers were facing a challenge of capacity was free, and we needed capacity. Our online, through telephone or app based deliveries went up multiple times, but we couldn't find people, right? So, and right now it sounds all simple, but if you remember, go back to April, there was a lot of social media backlash on people not getting slots for online. So we tied up with Uber, did an MOU, actually, all work from home. Can you imagine a contract with Uber, who consulted the ratio office? And then we actually had hundreds of Uber cars showing up, whom we trained the drivers how to make contactless delivery. And day one, our staff went, and we've done thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of deliveries using Uber. Same way, we tied up with many others like Scootsie, Rapido. So I think work from home has taught us a lot of new things, and for us, business has gone on. Not a single day, in a way, we've been delivering essentials, Abhijit.
Many a time in these kind of scenarios, I'll come to Ambareesh and Vishak and Abheek for their comments, but anything you can shed light on as regards the people themselves who are working with you, for you in your ecosystem? How did you manage that? Because that's a big part of the whole equation. We tend to sort of look at rupees and amount of trade volumes, etc., going up and down. But what about the people?
You'll be amazed, Abhijit. Actually, there's a lesson to be learned for our senior managers on that count. We've always been speaking that leadership is at the top, not at all. I learned the other way. I'll never forget in my life, in the first 1 week of lockdown, you were grappling that how to make sure that everybody turns up at store. There wasn't public transport. People working in stores, all of them don't have cars and bike. Many of them have bikes, but not all. You'll be surprised. I can give you examples that people on their own turned up walking 7 kilometers, sometimes stopped by the cops. In the beginning, they didn't have passes. If you remember, later government issued passes that you need a pass to move around. We were essential workers, but that also happened after some days. On the day one of lockdown, there was a lot of confusion. And so many of our staff actually turned up at the store. And later, when I do when I did go to the store, I met some of those staff and asked them that, what were you thinking, and how come that you weren't scared to walk or come alone 7 hours when there was so much. And the answers were so touching. They said, "Ab nahi karenge to kab karenge? We need to serve the people." And these are people at store level. So there's a lesson to be learned on leadership and being humble. And trust me, it's not as if there was a challenge to ask people to work, as if try to motivate them. You'll be amazed. This was a cause people aligned to on their own, and the task was really easy because essentials was so much in demand, like healthcare. There was a sense of responsibility. So I will take no credit that we really had to really call upon people. Frankly, everybody rose to the occasion on their own. As I say, in our case, don't forget, more than 90% people work in the stores, and they were working all the time. And when I say stores, means including the delivery staff.
No, thanks. That does give a lot of insight into it. Vishak, how about you? Is there anything else to top off what Devendra is saying?
Oh, yes. I think we also, in the apparel business, I work with Madura. Uh, in the apparel business, there is a lot of retail and there is a factory setup, a manufacturing setup, and we have the middle. Um, so, uh, of course, there is a lot of tales of strong sacrifices and performances in the front end and in the manufacturing. I guess your question is about work from home. Uh, on the work from home side, I think it was a lot of revelation. Starting from you got to figure out who has what aged kids who come into the calls, whose dogs bark suddenly in the meeting, to a lot of things that people learned to get used to over a period of time. Very early, we created some kind of policy guidelines around work from home, so that the timings are finite, the the ways of engagement. We created clear no meeting periods and so on. Once you got used to that, it became relatively easier. We learned how to do virtual store visits for places that you couldn't travel to, and that again worked fairly well. So in all, I would say it has worked out reasonably all right. It can be quite stressful staring at a screen for long periods of time, so we had to deal with some of that as well. But I would say yes, it has taught us a lot of things, Avi.
Abheek, from a consulting perspective, what changes did you see happening at the workforce of the organizations?
Yeah, so I think there was always this deep that you can get the maximum impact when you're working side by side with your clients. When you're in the trenches, right? And our model used to be 4 to 5 days working at the client side. I think as work from home taught us, there is obviously nothing which substitutes being there physically 100%. But I think you can get maybe 70-80% done remotely, right? I think being there physically makes a difference, but I would say 70-80% efficiency, I think, is something which we ended up achieving. The other thing was, when we were working with some of the retailers and some of the essential services, it was interesting because in certain occasions, the client organization that we were working with actually designated the consulting part of quote unquote essential services within themselves. So that gave us a sense that at least in certain clients, we were working so closely with them that it was difficult to separate who was the BCG team member and who was the client team member, which was there. And the one final thing which I would say somewhat in a lighter vein, today right now I'm doing this call sitting from a hotel room, but I think the amount of travel, I think, is going to see a certain reduction even when new normal happens, business travel. Now, whether it's going to be 20%, 25%, I think we'll have to see. But I think there is going to be some permanent reduction in business travel even when new normal comes.
Okay, that's interesting because I'll come back to that or maybe speak with you about that at a later point. Ambareesh, anything you want to add to this at this point?
I guess just a couple of things. One is that so speaking for Pepperfry, I guess the most important thing we figured was that everything needed to get a lot more simpler. So if there were processes that we were currently running or we were running at that point in time, which had a little bit of complexity in them, either if there were processes that we were running which were facing the consumer or internal, they needed to get a lot simpler. So frankly, the first month or so, we spent time just figuring out what those processes are and simplifying them. The second thing that I think, outside of the stuff that people said, and there's some great stories out there about the early days of the lockdown. But I think the second thing that stands out for me is the fact that I think productivity improved substantially. I mean, suddenly you went in a zone where you had endless 3 hour, 4 hour long meetings. I mean, people used to get their stuff done on time before they turned up for Zoom conversations. And I thought that that made for an immensely productive period of time. The most important thing from our standpoint, and our business is actually, very similar to, let's say, a lot of retail businesses in the sense that there's a high consumer touch point. The most important thing for us was we wanted to be amongst the first supply chains open, right? And so therefore, even the stuff that folks did in the supply chain teams across, 23 locations across India, despite local regulations changing on a practically hourly basis, I think was fantastic. I mean, it spoke volumes for the ownership that even the last delivery guy has for the success of the company. I mean, and to me, that was heartening. One always thought that, that would be the case. It's just always great when you see proof of concept panning out.
So let's move on to looking at the value chain in your businesses from the market in. So what changes, Abheek, you see coming through from a consumer behavior perspective, given it's been a long time. It's been almost a year or will be a year since people have been stuck at home, been in a lockdown, not traveling, not moving around. Different age groups and different socioeconomic strata operating differently. So what's your view on what's really changing from a consumer perspective?
So, I have always been a big believer in the Indian consumer story. Okay. I think, 2/3 of our GDP is consumption. That has been in some sense the prime mover. Now, I think what has taken a hit in the last 12 months is the we had a unique situation where, the three drivers, I would say, of this entire cycle is consumption, credit, and confidence. And both consumption and confidence actually took a hit, right? I think the good news is, especially in the last 3 months, we are seeing consumption and confidence both coming back. And we also have a situation where credit rates are low. So, what we are going to say, and, the way at least I think about it is we should almost not think of the year 2021 from a baseline perspective, right? Because if you look at the next 12 months, from a baseline perspective, everything will look fantastic. But if you look at from 1920, I think we are going to see an increase because, saving rates have gone up in the last 12 months. So people actually have money, which is there. If you look at it from a perspective of confidence, which had taken a beating, I think that is back up. And there is positive credit, which is there. So I'm actually hopeful that, in the next 12 months, we are going to see an uptick. Now, it is going to be different across categories, obviously, but I think we are going to see an uptick compared to earlier.
And Devendra, what's your view if you go by your business segments? How do you see the changes happening there on the same subject of consumer behavior change?
Abhijit, I can add to what Abhi said. So in the beginning, a lot of, we've always been omni-channel. So, but our online business used to be in a low single digit. So that really shot up multiple times. And over the last couple of months, it's actually, the footfalls are coming back. People are coming back to the store. So some bit of numbers are now happening in much in favor of people coming in the store. However, some changes permanent and people have adopted digital. If you say specific to the categories we sell, let me take some, like in the food and grocery business. I will also dwell on the apparel side. So I think the biggest one we've seen is back to roots. I think nostalgia came in for consumers. And if you remember right in the beginning of pandemic, I spoke to many consumers, and there was this vogue of watching the famous series Friends, and even Mahabharata and Ramayana. And much to my learning, people said that there's so much uncertainty that they want certainty, so that these stories they've seen in the past actually balance the uncertainty. So they want to bring in certainty, and it brings them a lot of peace when there was so much unknown out there. So they wanted the known. Another one I picked up is back to roots. While we waited for the cure of the virus, and while the vaccination has started, I think consumers went back to age-old proven repository of knowledge, which is all these homemade remedies which boosted our immunity. And I think consumers are going to continue this habit. So the belief in natural has increased than ever before. And brands must identify this relevant shift and bring convenience and work toward products. Like, for example, people can't keep taking multivitamins and pills, and when the travel will start, people can't keep carrying these tablets. And even when you take it in the form of a tablet, you feel you're taking a medicine, which they're not. So I think, how do you marry them, food with these nutrients? For example, let's say multivitamin atta. Can you add other things to the atta so it becomes a part of the food, or is it a part of the soup? So I think these trends will come in. Another one is branding of commodities. You see, we live in a world where they say you are what you eat, and more than ever before, people want to know what they are eating. I remember in my days, we used to design brands and pack, and we would always spend time on the front of the pack. And the back of the pack used to be mandatories, like MRP, batch number, ingredients, nutritional value, best before date, address of the manufacturing location. We would not spend time. We would give it to our team and say, you finish this part. You'll be surprised the number of people who are picking up product in the store and actually studying the back of the pack. They want to know what is in the product, what nutrients, what nutrition value. So I think back of the pack is becoming important, and what it means is people want to know what are they consuming. So I think, and more products are moving from commodities to package, and branding will even become more important, because branding does signify hygiene, safety standards, and also in a way the source credibility of the commodity. And we have clearly seen it in categories like staples, atta, poha. It's also given a fillip to our own brands. And another one I can tell you is from outsourcing to insourcing, another trend. You see, India, unlike the West, has never been a DIY, do it yourself market. Thanks to, we're able to get people to work for us for much lower cost than, let's say, for example, in the West. But now, when people weren't available and people even reduce the number of touch points at home, there's this new term which I say, like SaaS, software as a service. I think PaaS, like product as a service. So people couldn't go to salons, and there's so many new products which have come in the market, like pedicure sets, epilators, home grooming kits. There are new restaurant style sauces. People were stuck at home and they had home food, but after some time they wanted very tasty restaurant style. So new sauces have come which are like more spicy, and they give you a feel of you're having a restaurant food at home. Even we innovated, and we have a lot of pre-cut vegetables. If you want to make a pulao, you don't have to chop many vegetables, and you can save your time. It's all pre-packed in a tray. You can just pick it up for us. So what we call a recipe ready kit. And I think this addresses the whole point of negative labor. And I say on a lighter note, in the pandemic, Google Maps, whatever you type in the Google Map, all it'll show you is take you to the journey of your living room, or your dining room, or your kitchen, or your bedroom. You really couldn't go out. So I think people replaced discovering destinations with discovering talent. And some of them will stay even post pandemic, or even when all of us are vaccinated, because people have discovered they can do all these new things. And I think in some way in India, their DIY market will start.
So obviously you're talking about a DIY market, which isn't just necessarily about furniture and putting up your own electrical fittings, etc. It's a whole service aspect around a product. Ambareesh, coming to you on that, how do you see your business getting maybe more avenues and more segments of the market which you can address.
Yep. So actually, the entire shift to in consumerism over the last 1 year's worked in favor of most digital businesses, and frankly, Pepperfry has gained a lot. What are the fundamental shifts? The first is the fact that people first started buying grocery online. They got used to the digital medium, and that translated as supply chains opened up into them making other purchases online. So I think the overall digitalization of the consumer bit has increased substantially. Now, our thesis as a company has always been that there's just one consumer, right? She could be on a mobile phone at some point in time, on walking in a mall at another point in time, or on a laptop at a third point in time, but it's the same consumer. And I think what the pandemic did was that it made it very clear that it's the same consumer. You can serve the consumer of a physical store, or you can serve them digitally online. You're still serving the same consumer. And I think that's a fairly significant realization that most businesses would have had. And it's also something that's engendered a particular type of consumer behavior post-pandemic. So that's one very, I think, a big ticket item. The second thing, speaking specifically from my businesses, people spend a lot more time at home. So earlier, if, for example, you put up with that sofa which squeaked a little when you sat on it, now that you sit potentially 5-6 hours on it and do your calls, etc., I mean, you're not willing to accept that same sofa, or the lamp has to be just right, or you need a footstool because your feet ache after being in the same posture and not in an ergonomic chair. So all of that's resulted in, frankly, higher consumption for home and lifestyle goods. And that's the third trend, I think, which is going to continue. Just that awareness and an appreciation of all the things that are around us at home has increased manyfold. I think all of these trends are here to stay. I think even as things open up, you will find the need for businesses to, not only serve their customers really well in the offline world or in the real world, but also to serve their customers really well in the online world. And I think what this is going to result in is fundamentally the lines between online and offline, they're just going to keep getting blurred. I think one of the fundamental trends that will happen going forward is the use of augmented/virtual reality in blurring the lines further. I mean, if I were to be able to sell a table off a mobile phone screen where when you knock on the wood, you actually get the feel through haptic sensors of exactly how the wood would feel, and the sound is exactly the same, then I've fundamentally blurred a huge line and crossed the line from online to offline. So I think these are fundamental shifts which are here here to stay, and that's all courtesy what's happened over the last 9 to 12 months. So yeah.
Avi, just one quick comment. I think the only thing that I would say is, as we look at the last 12 months, obviously the urban landscape got impacted very differently than the semi-urban and rural, right? I think we should just keep that picture in mind, because if you look at the India versus Bharat, right? I think India, a lot of things, the way we are talking about it, a lot of that happened, right? But I think what also showed, if you really think about India as a portfolio, actually in middle India and rural India carried through a set, in this time period. And I think that's important to keep in mind. The second piece, and this to my mind is really going to be a fascinating question, is which of these are going to sustain and which are going to revert back. In China, obviously they had a much shorter lockdown, but the day after it opened, some of the luxury stores did their highest ever sales because there was such a pent-up demand, right? So it was like back with a vengeance. While if in the US, if you look at it, or in parts of Europe, pantry loading, which had happened massively the first time around in the lockdown, the second time it has actually not happened. So, to my mind, that's going to be very interesting. Which of these trends actually are going to sustain, and which of them are going to, revert back to some normal. And, the thing is, if you ask consumers, I don't think you necessarily always get the right answer. Because we are so caught up as consumers in our current reality, the consumer says something else, uh, does something else. So I think we should just be mindful of that. The point that Amrish said, keeping it simple and being reactive is going to be extremely important.
No, a very, very valid point, and we bring Vishak in on this. So just a couple of comments from my experience, having also working in the same sector, is I find it quite fascinating how India tends to get carried away with hype to begin with. After a point in time, reality sets in, and then there are about 167 or maybe 212 realities across India. Just given the urban and the rural and the
Yeah.
semi-rural, semi-urban, whichever definitions you want to have. So Vishak, what's your view on this? Like, are we
Yeah.
seriously as consumers going to change that much, or are we going to revert back to type?
Okay, so there are two questions here then, Avi. One is now, and second is what is a sort of permanent change which has happened. So here are my, and I'll take my industry's lens, apparel business, and share from that perspective 6 trends which are relevant for all of us. And absolutely, Abhik is bang on in terms of the trends being very different from for India versus Bharat. Uh, Trend number one, and this is probably more urban, is we are going to see a big trend called back to office. And back to office is going to come impact us in all of us in many ways. For me, it might be people buying fresh clothes for going back to work, and fresh clothes might be because they're bored of the old. Fresh clothes because they've changed their size, their body type, they've lost weight, gained weight, any of those things. So there is an entire thing around back to work which is going to happen, and different companies, different businesses are going to be able to respond to that the way they would. Uh, the big fat Indian wedding is going to be back. And many people would have seen a strong business rebound in October, November. And that was to a large extent some opening up of weddings. And the wedding season, as you know, India gets married by the star signs. So the stars were just right for October and November, actually up to 12th December. And it will happen again April, May, June, especially May and June. So we're going to see a very, very strong, impactful wedding season. And, if hopefully with the vaccine and all of that, if things look better, I think we're going to see and again, different businesses will have different applications of this insight, but I think it's going to happen. Festivals, and this is where Devendra's point around back to roots, and it's going to be big. Festivals already are helping people to find some kind of grounding, some kind of connect with friends and families and all of that. I think festivals have almost got one more boost of energy, and people are celebrating festivals strongly. Fourth, play. I think health and fitness became very important, and my sense is it will continue to remain so. And again, like for Devendra's business, it might be fortified foods. In my business, it might be things that help you to comfortably play or jog or walk or any of those things. So play, my sense is going to be a trend which will likely continue. Play as in exercise, health, fitness, and so on. The fifth, which is hanging out with friends, hanging out in various public places and so on, which had come down significantly. I think it's going to come back with a vengeance. So again, many things which are about hanging out are movie theaters opening up, malls coming back to full glory, and so on. I think hanging out is going to be a very important aspect. And finally, travel. I think travel is going to be, like Abhik said, is going to get repurposed, so to speak. People will change the reasons for travel. I think a lot of meetings where you just have to exchange information will probably shift to settings like this. But there are many more which will require travel, and I think travel is going to get repurposed in that sense. Uh, Including a lot of domestic travel. Even domestic vacation travel is expected. At least we see a lot of opportunity in terms of things which you do to enable a lot of nearby getaways, and so on. So these are 6 things that I sense, Avi, which will be in the next few months that things pan out. Of course, all of this assuming no second wave and things going in the same trajectory.
Avi, if I could just add to
No,
this,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add one more thing that we've been noticing on our marketplace, and I don't know whether it's a sign of things to come, but it's been something that's been a fairly secular trend over the last 6 to 9 months. It's that so there's this entire shift or clustering of brands that's happening. So the bigger brands are getting bigger, and the smaller brands, or rather direct-to-consumer brands, are actually taking another bunch of franchise from towards for their products towards the consumer. So it's almost as if the it's the middling brands that used to exist, which had consumer franchise, are actually reducing substantially. So it's either the bigger brands getting bigger or direct to consumer, smaller brands which are serving customers, and there's a lot more customer franchise getting driven. I find that a really interesting trend, and it's something that started emerging over the last 6 months, at least on our marketplace. So I just thought it would be relevant.
And I can add, Abhijit, to even what Ambareesh and Vishak said. It connects so well. I think first of all, in apparel business, this category, what Vishak calls play, we call it athleisure. I'm sure that's a term in the industry, and I think it just took off when apparel was allowed to sell. And I think Indians have become so comfortable, and that's I I feel a lot of them is going to wear it to the office when they hit back the office. The younger ones still do. The other one is festivals. You see, when it comes to grocery and food business, what Amrish said, we saw it in brands. Trusted brands are becoming even bigger. Older trusted brands, because people went back for trust, in this unknown. And second is festival. When else do people connect with each other, even within their own families, cousins, uncle, aunts, friends? I think it's on festival, on Diwali and Holi, and the number of festivals India has. Otherwise, everybody's busy now. So people are missing it so badly. I have this feeling that this whole pent-up demand, I think, and we saw it in Christmas. We saw it just 3 days before Diwali. I think it works very well. It's exploding. So I think that's going to be huge in the coming year.
So, Avi, just to one comment, people always say in retail it is about location, location, location. I think, I was having one of the conversations, and what Vishak said, I occasion, occasion, occasion instead of location, 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 right? Because actually, if you look at the themes that Vishak also talked about, each of them is related to an occasion or a set of occasions coming together.
Being a consultant like I am, he quickly picked up the 3 words which come into play. I did have another question, because one of the things that also come into play, since we're doing a lot of work with organizations which are in the service industry also, right? And a large part of the population that's working in the urban side of the country is living in homes which are maybe 750 square feet to 1,050,000 square feet in size, with both husband and wife working, maybe at least one child, if not two, going to online school, and at least one set of parents at home. So one of the comments, because of some of the surveys we're running with clients at this point in time, is that people definitely want to head out because they just don't see that their 1,000 square feet home, where there's 7 individuals or 6 individuals living over there, is going to give them any kind of respite or time for themselves, or even just time to think. So I suppose that comes into play when, Vishak, you mentioned about people will still want to meet in person. It's not as much fun, is it, that when for example, we're just having to meet on Zoom right now. It's not the same. Let's face it. Companies will resist internal travel for some time, till we realize that it does seriously play with people's emotional linkage with the brand and the team, because you're only meeting them in a faceless scenario over a video conference, or you're meeting them with the video on, but that's about it. Sorry, Vishak, you were saying something.
Yeah, just one point to build on what you said. There is another side to it, and I'll tell you, I was talking to a good friend who's the CEO of a retail organization, and we were having a business review. and there was a internet outage twice on his side, and he was apologizing. Hey, sorry about this and all. I said, please don't feel sorry about this. You're my customer. In a normal world, I would have woken up at 4 in the morning, reached the airport, stood in the queues for check-in, for security, for waiting in the departure lounge, got into the plane, got off the plane, went through all of that, get into a cab, come to your office, wait at your reception and meet you. I think I'll take this 2 minutes of outage. So I think there are, and we had a good meeting, and our business continues to grow well with them. So there is another side to it, that for some kind of transactions, there will uh, likely be a new normal.
Did this situation actually give an opportunity for some strange ecosystem players to come in and help you tap a market which you hadn't tapped before? Could be a segment, could be a region, could be a particular socio-economic segment of people, so on and so forth. Devendra, you want to sort of think about that and give a response?
So I can, Abhijit, speak that I think the ways of working evolved. I can, rather than on the consumer side, let me speak on the customer and the partnership side, the channel side. I think a lot of ecosystem partnerships came into being, and you suddenly realize that an organization like, when the pandemic started and the lockdown started, and we were facing that, oh my God, from so many orders in the store now, a large part or a big part is shifted online, and we don't have people who can deliver because that wasn't planned. So then you wonder what you're going to do. So I think an organization has a limited sphere of influence, but when partnerships are explored with ecosystem players, I think it unlocks value for all the participating organization. There is this whole digital conversations about platforms and creating ecosystem. I think it can be done physically also. Obviously it's part digital, part physical, and I think today partnerships are not just limited to a few, but these new terms like frenemies and co-opetition, these are in vogue, and rightly so. If you see some of the wallet brands or payment apps, they have their own mall, but they also take payment from a competitor who has a payment gateway or who has a payment option, and vice versa. So you are competing and you are actually working together at the same time to serve the same consumer. And I think we see a lot of live examples now, which in pandemic have come into being. For example, the vaccine itself, a couple of pharma companies were working together to develop the vaccine together. If you see in automotive, Suzuki and Toyota, I think they compete, but they came together, on an alliance to work on an electric vehicle for technology and autonomous, drive autonomous cars. And again, nothing to do with the pandemic. This will continue to go on. I think this ecosystem partnership is something which is going to grow. And I can tell you for us, as I said, when the lockdown was announced, the online delivery, people wanted goods delivered at home, and that went up multiple times. So I've mentioned we tied up with Uber, all work from home, contracts were done. But that was only one example. We tied up with so many companies like Scootsy or with Swiggy. We had to create a massive partnership so that we can have a capacity to deliver at homes, and all these, MOUs were signed. Uh, and in Hyderabad, I'll tell you, Flipkart had approached us to work on an experiment, and we studied data analytics and saw in the beginning, consumer were buying, when there was pantry loading happening, they were wanting to buy all the orders has some SKUs common. For example, you don't want to be stocked out when you're stuck at home with sugar and salt and, let's say, wheat, atta. So most orders had it. So we actually bundled it after studying data and made a single pack. And then when Flipkart approached us, we worked with them. And again, that's a partnership. And we could sell that in Hyderabad. So I think there are multiple examples which otherwise would have never taken place. Who would have thought we'll deliver groceries in Uber and we'll be, demonstrating to an Uber driver how to make contactless delivery and with safety and with a distance and deliver. So I think there's a lot of things to learn.
So, Abhi, one of the interesting examples that I saw at close quarters was a bunch of health tech, hospital players, etc., came together and created this platform, Swasth, which was basically saying, create a common digital platform rather than, different people creating that. And that was offered as a public good to, the government and and etc. Right?
Yeah, I'm looking for sort of examples, and thanks, Devendra. I'm looking for examples wherein a whole new segment was uncovered, or a whole new market, which in the past you would have thought was very difficult to tap. Cost to serve was going to be too high, whatever. And this sort of gave an opportunity to think things differently. While Devendra does have good examples. Was there anything like that, Ambareesh and Vishak?
Actually, multiple things come to mind, Avi, as you ask. For example, before this pandemic, we had never made a mask. Okay. Uh, Within a week of uh, the pandemic in India, we had our first mask. And within 2 weeks, we had something which was ready for testing with consumer panels and so on. And we had a 3-layered mask which offered some 99+% bacterial filtration efficiency and so on and so forth. The point I want to make is this: uh, a business which was not used to a product like this has sold over 1 crore masks. Now, what it did for us was not just to say, hey, we have sold well in masks, because that was as much a responsibility as brands as it was, something we had to do in the market. What it told us was, hey, look, we can be a lot more flexible in manufacturing in the kind of ways that we do things. And it led to many changes in the way we create flexible manufacturing in our business. So that's one kind of a dramatic shift that we were able to see. Many come to mind. Maybe we can ask the other panelists to share some of their thoughts.
Actually, Avi, there are, I think, three things that come to my mind. One is that, we've always been a home furniture company. So we've shied away from office furniture. And suddenly, one of the things we realized was that people's homes had become their offices, right? And so therefore, entering into, the entire area of setting up a home office, which includes ergo chairs, study tables, etc., was just a completely, let me not say completely. I mean, we used to do some of it. However, just the way we had to expand that entire range in order to cater to a completely new customer need was something that stood out for me. The second thing that I think stood out for us was the fact that, in a time when, and we had this India versus Bharat conversation earlier in the debate, the thing that stood out for me was, while India was or is going to take some time to, or let's say the more urban areas, etc., or the more metropolitan areas are taking their own time to come back, it's the non-metro towns where business tends to have picked up and come back fairly substantially. So one of the things that translated into it for us was just our entire franchisee store expansion. We've added close to 15 stores in the last 2 months and done all of them virtually. At least the entire design, walkthrough, store launches, etc., everything has been done virtually. And we're currently adding like 5 a month. I mean, so which is way more than anything we've done on a run rate basis than ever before. So these are things that kind of stood out for us. I mean, creating a completely new customer segment especially for office furniture. The second being franchisee expansion, especially as we expanded into non-metro towns in India. The third thing that stood out for me is the fact that, and I think the segments, still we've just scratched the surface on it. I mean, there was this entire segment which used to get products made of carpenters. And so there was this entire, let's call it made to order furniture segment. And I think that segment's has gone down substantially, and it's instead being taken over by the ready-made consumer segment. And I think the consumer is very different for the ready-made segment versus the erstwhile made-to-order segment. And so therefore, I think for us also as a business to evolve over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll have to get a deeper understanding of that consumer. We'll have to keep bringing out a slew of products which address that consumer. And I think that's great headroom for growth over the next, potentially if we get it right, over the next 5 years.
Abhijit, I can add to what Amrish said. In fact, one of our chains is Nature's Basket, like in Bombay, Pune, and Bangalore. And you see, the whole adoption to organic and gourmet food is a very slow burn in any country. It takes time, and it just suddenly shifted. It tipped because of the whole health reason and immunity. And so Nature's Basket saw that big shift in people wanting to buy much more healthier, natural, gourmet food. At Spencer's, I'll tell you, we could tap an area of customer, not a behavioral change, but right in the beginning when people weren't coming out, imagine our stores are designed to serve the consumers when consumers come to the store. But when you get such a massive online orders, actually the stores had to learn to develop as a dark store. Because you're at the same time serving the consumers coming, and from the same store, your staff is picking up packing orders and delivering to the customers. And that's where we, worked on this RWA concept, and we actually pioneered it, this Resident Welfare Association and Buildings and Complexes. So we now have a massive database. We got in touch with the society presidents or secretary, and we kept a box in the building, and we said till 4 o'clock or next day 11 in the morning, please put your orders. They would write and put in orders, 60, 70, 100 orders at one time. One of our persons from the nearest store would go pick up that dabba, bring it to the store, pack 100 orders, and in a smaller truck or a van, bring it to the building. And then, through social distancing, keeping a gap. Imagine you could serve 100 orders at one time to different individuals in the same complex, and you didn't have to make 100 different trips on a bike for the same order if it was an online or a phone order. You could bring them as one logistics cost from the store till the building and then serve. And this was pretty big. We could do it with hundreds of complexes. This is not a small number like, just an experiment. It worked very well for us.
So great. So Abheek, unfortunately, network problems made you bounce off, but it was about saying that did this particular circumstance and situation open up new segments, new markets, previously too expensive on a cost to serve basis, or maybe difficult to reach out to? And we had some really good, interesting segments and customer segments that opened up and products that opened up. So that's great. And this, so just to complete that, Devendra, but do you think as things open up and as people actually start going out, because there's also an experience thing when you go to Nature's Basket shop or you go to Spencer's shop, right? Do you think the same trend will continue about the 100 orders a day being put into a cardboard box and people are going to continue doing that, or you see that trickling down a bit and it was more an opportunistic play?
Absolutely. It continued for many, many months, but the RWA numbers have trickled down because the customers are back in the store. 85% of, see, so what's happened? Let me give you an example. A typical consumer, if was buying grocery 3 times in a month, coming to the store, and I'm making it simplified. The number is in decimal because you divide the number of bills by the number of customers. So the number comes in decimal because not per customer. Because of the pandemic, people wanted to reduce the touch point. So if they were coming 4 times, they started coming 3 times or 2.5 times. So the number of trips went down, but the buying order, the average bill value, as we call it, ABV, went up by 20 to 40%. So they said, I'm going to come out less, but in each time when I come out, I'm going to buy a lot more. So rather than buying for 1 week, I'll buy for 10 days or 15 days. That phenomena, the good thing is that while consumers are coming back, the ABV is coming down also, but not to that extent. But you're absolutely right, Abhijit. The RWA model served very well in those times. It is still on. But of course, the numbers have come down because people don't want to go down and put an order in a dabba, and they're very comfortable now calling on the phone. And that's got replaced with our e-commerce app and our phone delivery.
So I think we're on the hour. And let's give the management consultant the opportunity to have the last word, maybe. Avik, anything you want to add or anything we haven't covered? I'm sure there's a lot we haven't covered, but anything specific you want to mention now?
No, I think the only thing I was saying, and I hope I don't get cut off this time, was, I think if I think about retail.
It was not in our hands. Avik, it was not intentional. It wasn't in our hands.
Retail for sustaining growth. I think the one thing I would throw as an opportunity for retailers is what DC and Vishak were talking about, which is, there are some things that retailers don't end up doing because the cost, time, effort of creating that infrastructure is very high, right? If there can be common infrastructure which multiple people can use, whether it is digital or physical, that'll be competition, cooperation at its best. Can that be something which can be an opportunity? And what I was describing earlier is in healthcare, there are examples of that have actually started happening at scale. If you look at the telecom industry, the sharing of the airwaves in some sense is that. The bank ATM network is that. So I think that's something which could be actually a very interesting opportunity for retail.
No, interesting, very interesting. Yes, it's just that I think the Western world, where that actually happens very easily, is a very homogenized world compared to the 167 or 238 Indias that we have, which then creates a bit of a dissonance in the ability to manage that very easily. Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions. So over back to the ET people.
Thank you, Abhijit. Thanks for your
Thanks, Avi.
Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you, Avi.
everyone. Thanks,
Very cool.
Vishak.